It does not appear that people are moving to XML just because it gives them personalization. We looked at the question of the DITA implementers versus the people who said they were not implementing DITA, who were implementing something else, either a custom structure or sometimes DocBook. What we found was that, relatively speaking, the DITA implementers were more concerned about localization, about the cost and effort of developing content, and about information exchange. Also, the DITA implementers ranked reuse higher than the non-DITA implementers. On the non-DITA side, consistency was actually the most important factor, not reuse. This makes a certain amount of sense. If you are producing DITA content and using the DITA architecture, then presumably you are concerned about, or you are interested in, the features that DITA gives you, such as content references and DITA maps and topic-based authoring and all those architectural elements that make it possible to reuse your content. If you're implementing non-DITA, then what would be the logic for that? And perhaps a driving factor might be that you have very strict organizational requirements and you want to use XML to enforce your requirements. So in that case, it would make a lot of sense that consistency would be a top priority for you. The DITA structure, as you probably know, is very loose and very open, and you really can do a lot inside DITA. So if I were producing content where I really want to lock down the organization and have it be very, very consistent, then I might either configure DITA or I might choose a non-DITA structure in order to get that consistency because I can get it locked down more easily. So as I said, 16% said, no, there will be no structure in our future. We are not going to do it. We absolutely refuse. Interestingly, of those 16%, we asked, why not? Why are you not moving to structure? What makes you decide that structure is bad and to be avoided? And the answer is 67% of the time, so a strong majority said cost and time of implementation. I'll come back to this in a second. We also got about 30% that said staff will not adjust, and respondents were allowed here to give us multiple responses. Other things we saw were answers like, our writing group is very small and we don't see any value in going to XML because it's overkill for what we're doing. Small amounts of content and we don't see any value. Lack of control over formatting and output was a concern. A lack of value seen by management, which I think is a little bit different from XML has no value for us because we're small. There was XML would have value, but our management doesn't see it. And finally, we had several people that said, we're happy with our current tools and they work, so why should we make any changes? Now, if we go back and look at these numbers, the 67% that said, in effect, it is too expensive, what they are really saying is XML is interesting and it has potential, but there's no return on investment. The return that we would get compared to the cost and time of implementation is not sufficient. What that tells me is that for those 67%, they might choose to go down the structure road at some date in the future if the cost and time of implementation were reduced. So if it became easier and or cheaper to implement, they might consider it. Now, the 30% who said staff will not adjust, this number was quite a bit higher than the responses that we got when we asked about change management problems from the people that actually implemented. Now, there are a couple of different ways of looking at that. One is that the people who said staff will not adjust were overstating the problem. They were paranoid about their staff, and their staff will, in fact, adjust, and based on the numbers that we saw from the other participants, everything will be just fine. That would be one perspective. The other is that those people for whom change resistance was not a showstopper have already implemented XML, and the ones that are left are the ones where, in fact, the staff will not adjust and they will quit. Or worse, resist quietly and not quit. So this 30% that says staff will not adjust, that is a hard problem to address. I will say that when we see this in our implementations, these adjustment issues and questions and problems, we generally start with a slightly different question, which is, how much unique domain knowledge does your staff have? Because, for example, if you work in a biotech company where the technical communicators need to have advanced degrees in biochemistry, and it takes them a year or two just to get up to speed on what they're writing about, there is a good possibility that they can pick their own tools, that if they refuse to move to XML, you will have to allow them to refuse to move to XML, because it is not so easy to find PhD biochemists who can write well. However, if you have a different kind of environment and your domain expertise is not quite so specialized, or if your writers are not quite so specialized, then perhaps staff will not adjust is not such a showstopper. It might lead to turnover, and that is a cost that you, of course, must consider. But the staff will not adjust. Staff gets a veto issue, needs to be looked at really very closely, and in the context of how unbelievably unique are your writers, your content contributors. So that was something to consider there. I do not believe, of course, that everybody in the universe will move to structure. I am sure that there will be some people that will not go down that road. I do think that 16% is actually lower than I expected in terms of people saying, we will not do it. And then to see that 2/3 of the people who said we are not going to structure cited what amounts to an it's too expensive kind of argument, where we know that the cost is coming down over time. That was interesting. So it looks to me as though over time we will get not just a majority, but a significant majority that will be working in XML. So the next question, of course, was, how did they do? We looked at the people, the 30% who said we have implemented, and then we asked, how did you do? How did it go? So let me explain what's going on in this chart. We had 7 factors that we asked about when we asked people to rank their priorities. Why did you implement structure? Which are these 7 shown here. We had a forced ranking system. So of the 7 factors, people were required to rank them in order from 1 to 7, with 1 item in level 1 and 1 item in level 7, where 1 was the top priority. There was, by the way, a lot of complaining about that. Then we looked at which factors were ranked number 1 or number 2, and by what percentage. So when you look at this chart here, or this table, content reuse was ranked number 1 or number 2 by 61% of respondents. And that was, in fact, the winner. Right behind that was document consistency at about 60%. And then you see a big drop-off down to cost and effort and localization costs, and another drop-off to information exchange, personalization, and compliance. So that middle column tells you the percentage of people that ranked that particular factor 1 or 2. Then the next thing we did was we looked at the 30% who were finished and said, okay, did you achieve content reuse, yes or no? And 86% said yes. 91% said we got document consistency. So as you go down the list here, what you see is that in every case, the percentage that got that result is significantly higher than the percentage that said that was a top or second to top priority. So it looks to me as though these implementations overall are extremely successful. Now, what we did not do was look specifically at the respondents. In other words, we did not say, okay, take the 60% that said 1 or 2 for content reuse. Now, of those 60%, what percentage got content reuse? These are overall numbers. So of the overall completed implementations, 60.7% said content reuse was 1 or 2. 86% said they got it. That does not necessarily mean that the 60% were all successful, but the numbers look pretty good. So about a 26-point spread there, a 31-point spread in document consistency. Nearly everybody got document consistency. I also thought cost and effort of developing content was interesting because only about a quarter said they needed it, but about 2/3 said they got it. So cost there did come down.